what we are going to be looking at today on the program, regulations of businesses, regulations challenges for businesses, especially SMEs in Nigeria. Joining me in the studio to further converse is the DG and CEO of the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, Adewale-Smatt Oyerinde. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us. But before we go to that conversation, we're supposed to have you, I think, about 2 weeks ago to talk about the expatriate new law that's going to take effect in August. Yeah. So, as the NECA, what's your position on that policy?
Well, we don't have a position. I think what we have is an alignment, as it were, because the organized private sector was part of the conversation. Okay. You know, when the ministry started the process, the private sector was brought into confidence, and so we sat down with the ministry, and I think there was a committee between the organized private sector and the Ministry of Interior that looked at the key elements of those reforms, and they dot the I's, they cross the T's, and there was an alignment between the private sector and the ministry before the rollout. Actually, the rollout will start from 1st of May. Okay. There will be 3 months amnesty, amnesty or
follow
3 months grace.
Yes.
For everybody that doesn't have the proper papers, proper immigration documents to regularize his papers, so that by 1st of August, enforcement will start effectively. So, for us, it's all about the homeland. Homeland security is a big issue anyway. Okay. And that is domiciled within the Ministry of Interior, Immigration Services. So, I think we are aligned significantly with all the conversations that has gone on, and the implementation also. I think we are also a part of it. Suffice to say that we'll be having a major stakeholders engagement on Friday. The Ministry of Interior with the organized private sector in Lagos from 10 a.m. on Friday. So those for the ministry to also explain the key elements of the reforms to the private sector. Then everybody, if you have questions to ask, you ask questions, and so that there won't be an issue of we are not aware.
Yes, exactly. That tends to happen at times. Thank you so much for that insight and more information on the situation. Now let's get to our conversation today. Regulations that challenge SMEs. What are businesses? But Nigeria is mostly SME driven. Our economy is mostly SME driven. Now, what can you tell us? What are the biggest regulatory challenges that SMEs currently face in our country?
First, let's appreciate the work of the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Commission, PEBEC, which has facilitated a couple of reforms was started by PEBEC a few years ago, and those reforms actually have been kept alive by the new leadership of PEBEC. That's about making business registration easier. The Bank of Industry, the small and medium-scale enterprises, also creating some level of access for MSME, for SME, and for big businesses. But as you rightly said, it's one thing for you to facilitate access. It's one thing for you to facilitate, to create an environment for growth. Then, if you don't deal with the core regulatory areas, then it creates a lot of problems for yourself and for those that you are trying to save. So for us, regulation remains a key part that we think government have to look at consistently. We don't have to take our eyes off the ball when it comes to regulation, because regulation, from our perspective, why we believe regulation is very, very important in an environment. You can't toy with regulation. But regulation must play a very significant role of promoting or enhancing trade and promoting business development, because in the final analysis, you want to talk about GDP, you want to talk about every indices of growth. You can trace all those indices back to the private sector. It's the private sector that drives it. So regulation must necessarily, as a matter of principle, promote private sector growth. And for you to promote private sector growth, you must also promote MSME and SME growth. So those are the positions we have concerning the issue of regulation. So now coming to the specifics, regulation are varied and diverse. You know, you have NAFDAC playing a regulatory role. You have SOM playing a regulatory role. You have the NSITF, the Social Insurance Trust Fund, playing a regulatory role. You have custom playing a regulatory role, even though it's a service. So you have so many agencies that a business naturally have to deal with. And the idea for us is all of them in the context of, especially those that have that their name directly or indirectly connotes service. They must serve indeed, because once a regulator is leaving the realm of providing service and enabling businesses, it's moving to the realm of revenue generation. The whole context of his existence changes. The psychology of his operators also changes, because it now becomes
about making money.
About making money. Which and where are you going to make the money from? From the same people that you are supposed to save, from the same people that you are supposed to help save money. They are the ones that you now face to make money from. So those are the key issues that we have. Regulators must play the regulatory role, which substantially, as is done in most places, facilitate growth and ensure the right things are done. Now, there are businesses that will, rightly or wrongly, you know, honestly, you know, make mistakes.
Okay.
In the context of engagement, in the context of
running a business.
Yeah, we think there should be gaps for correctional engagement to say, look, you don't do this like this, and you do it once, probably we'll move you to the you give you a warning, you know,
like officers, warning, then
warning first, then
query.
you do this second time, probably we'll move you to the grey list. To say, okay, yes, you are in the grey list. If you do this the third time, we'll put it in the blacklist, because if you've done it 3 times, that means you are not really fit to run business in this environment. Rather than we just focusing more primarily on penalties, you know, because when you give penalties, you know, the business suffers in the first instance, but the biggest loser will be the workers at the long run, and then the people that the business is supposed to serve. So if you give me
consumers.
Exactly, if you give me a penalty of 1 million naira, you know, the 1 million naira will probably not fly from heaven. You know, it won't just disappear. If I remove 1 million naira from my capital, it doesn't just disappear. You know, I have to spread that 1 million naira on across the goods and services that I provide. So the consumer eventually suffers, and that is the key issue that we want the regulators to see, that look, promote growth, promote development, and collaboratively work with organizations like ours, so that we can identify those businesses that we have seen to be consistent, that are not adding value to the national development as well. And then we can point them to you, and then you deal with them as necessary.
All right, so one of the other issues that we see that is a major issue is taxing. I know tax reforms are taking place, but you see the SMEs complain about, you know, on uniform, rather not uniform taxes. Anybody can come tomorrow and tell you, oh, this, AMAC is doing this, FCDA is doing that. Saying, you're wondering what's happening. What's the issue? Why can't we have a uniform tax system for SMEs?
You know, that is the ideal, and that is where I think we are going in the context of our engagement with government. And we want to say kudos to the Taiwo Idile-led Presidential Committee on Fiscal and Tax Policy Reforms. But they've done a great job trying to harmonize these taxes. You know, sometimes when we say organized businesses pay over 70, 80 different taxes, sometimes people think it's just statistics, you know, but you know, it's really an issue of 1, 2, 3, 4, 80, 90 different taxes, levies, and fees across everywhere, including local government. You know. In fact, it's even worse at the local government level, because many of those, the kind of gestapo, the kind of harassment that goes on in those places, you can't really place it.
You will see a taxi driver, and he's buying this ticket, that ticket, that ticket, that ticket.
Absolutely, ticket. Even the woman selling, go to the market. Even the woman selling peppers, selling tomatoes, selling, the shop owners, they go there, harass them. But because the balance of terror is tilting towards those guys, so the shop owner will just be forced to pay because I don't want any kind of disruption. So it's a big issue, and the ideal that you mentioned of harmonizing all those taxes, let the government at the state level deal with the sharing formula. Just give every business, SME, MSME, that look, your total tax exposure is 5,000. Now, how the state government will share it with the local government, let them deal with the logistics and save the business owner this proliferation of taxes and levies. Even when the Taiwo Daily Committee has significantly completed its work, we still have levies and fees still coming from the back door, in crass contradiction to what the committee is doing. And we believe strongly that any agency, any authority that is coming up with new taxes and levies, even when a presidential committee has done the harmonization, I think that agency or that organization is actually working at cross purposes against the aims of this administration.
So we see that CAC over time has tried to make business registration quite easy. First of all, they had this 5,000 naira package, you do it, and then but is that enough to close the gap?
One thing for you to register, this is the irony of it, and sometimes if you don't create the nexus, people don't really understand it. You make business registration easier for me, so that I can register.
Yeah,
that's one. Now you make access to funds easy for me. So probably you give me a grant of 10 million naira, or you give me a loan of 10 million naira at 1%, hypothetically. You don't get 1% anyway. Or you give me 10 million naira at 1%, hypothetically. From your own end, from the finance end, you have enabled my business.
Okay.
Absolutely. So from your finance end, you can go to the press to say, look, government has given 10 billion to MSMEs, 10 million each to MSMEs. You come to the podium, do the picture ops. Now, I leave the picture ops. I get to the real market. Now, unfortunately, for the business, you find yourself in the area of couch as band A. Now, a chunk of
your money is already going to just electricity.
Going to electricity, to power.
I understand.
Now, I have to deal with the many taxes, levies, and fees. A chunk of that amount is already going to that. So, on the long run, now, landlords and agents, there's another conversation about landlords and agents now.
Yes.
Now, the landlord and agent also realize, or the landlords realize, okay, I heard that you guys have collected
money.
10 million. He added a bit to the rent. So you realize in the face value, I have been given 10 million naira grant or loan at 1%. The expectation is, look, as a good businessman, you should be able to make good use of that fast. But there are a lot of hawks and sharks that have lined up behind to make that quantum of cash useless in my hands. So those are the contradictions that we think government really have to deal with. And part of it is dealing with the issue of taxes. Let the government at the state level handle the collection of tax. Let the business just have to pay. I have to pay 150,000 naira per annum, per month.
So per month?
Per month, I pay it once. They give me a universal ticket, a universal receipt. That's, look, after payment, the distribution of that amount between the state and local